2020 is fast approaching, and although it's a year marked by a unique number form, there are a lot of events that are likely going to help define the year. But what are they? Join us as we explore them all. Number 8. The superhero war continues. Without a doubt, the event that has defined the last 10 years of pop culture history is, by and large, the superhero war that is going on in movie theaters all over the world. Sure, the Marvel Cinematic Universe started in 2008, but it was within this current decade that things really took off, including having the Avengers film in 2012 break $200 million at the domestic box office in its first week. Several movies across the superhero spectrum breaking $1 billion in profits, including Aquaman and likely Joker, which surprised many people. And of course, Avengers Endgame becoming the best-grossing movie in all of cinema history. So where does that leave us for 2020? What's coming up? Well, for the MCU, they have two movies that they're really hoping continues their hot streak, as it were. First up in Black Widow, which has been a film a long time coming in the eyes of fans. It's technically a prequel movie, as Black Widow died in Endgame. Spoilers. But we don't think fans will mind. The big risk for Marvel, though, is Eternals, which is a lesser-known franchise in the Marvel Comics world, but it has an all-star lineup, so maybe that'll cover it. As for DC Comics, they're arguably aiming to have their biggest year yet with two major films. First is Birds of Prey, starring Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. This will be yet another R-rated DC Comics film following Joker, and many think it'll be a hit. Then there's the highly anticipated Wonder Woman 1984. The original Wonder Woman also shocked the world with just how quality it was, and many expect the sequel to do the same. So which of these two sides will reign supreme when all is said and done? It's hard to say, but it's going to be a fun year either way. Number 7. Global warming continues. Okay, we had our fun. Now let's get to a little more serious of a note here, and that would be to talk about global warming. The event is something that is literally taking the world by storm, so to speak, because many in the governments are refusing to acknowledge its existence, and the few that aren't able to do much to get things done. That's why many people like Greta Thunberg have stepped up to try and bring more attention to this epidemic that honestly is gripping our planet. Of course, the question you're likely asking is, but how much can 1 year do in the grand scope of the world, even with global warming on full blast? And to be fair, the effects might not be what you think, but that's not the question to ask here. Think of global warming like a crack in a dam. At first you might think, oh, that crack won't grow big enough to harm anyone, so you leave it there unattended until eventually the whole dam bursts and floods everything in sight. That's where we're headed in many ways. That's why people like Greta are stepping forward to make sure that we don't waste one more year in regards to trying to prevent global warming, or at the very least trying to ensure that we buy ourselves some time to better prevent it. There are ways to slow down global warming, but we need to take action in order to do so. Global warming will continue to happen, but whether we try and stop it is up to us entirely. Number 6. Overpopulation. Unlike global warming, many people in the world acknowledge that overpopulation is not only a real thing, but that it grows every single year. Pop quiz. On average, how many people are born in a single year? Don't worry, I'll wait while you think of your answer, and no cheating. I'll know if you do. Done? Good. The answer is about 131.4 million people per year. That's a lot of people, and if that were the only factor to figure, you could easily see why overpopulation is a problem. But you might have forgotten that a lot of people also die every year. On average, the death rate of the world is 55.3 million people per year, and some of those, sadly, are the babies that are born. But even with the difference, that means there are still about 76.1 people in the world that are being added to all the other people in the world, which, by the way, is about 7.53 billion as of 2017, and is expected to be close to over 8 billion people in 2021. So in 2020, we're getting even closer to that number. The reason that overpopulation matters as a whole is a question of resources. As marvelous as humanity is in many ways, we do not create a natural equilibrium with our environment like regular animals do. We take a lot of resources to do our own thing, especially with major cities and metropolitan areas. So with even more people to take care of, those resources will be further strained. And if something isn't done, more people could end up homeless or without the things they need to take care of themselves and their family, which is why efforts are being done to find us new places to live. Before we expand on that thought though, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way you don't miss out on all of our weekly videos. Number 5. The mission to Mars continues. If you're looking to find an event that'll likely define the next decade of the human race, then the missions to Mars will be that event. Granted, in 2020 we're not going to be going to Mars, landing on Mars, or anything that impactful. However, between NASA and SpaceX, tests will be going on to try and get us to the red planet for us to potentially live on. So what exactly needs to be done in 2020? Well, in regards to SpaceX, they're going to be further testing their brand new rockets and spaceships. Yes, they're really making a thing called a spaceship, in order to ensure that it can make the journey to Mars, which is very important because no man-made ship, probes and satellites don't count, has ever made it to anywhere close to Mars. So the notion of having a ship that can not only survive in deeper space, but would be able to handle all sorts of situations we didn't have to deal with in the moon missions is paramount. Furthermore, both SpaceX and NASA will continue to work on what supplies to take to the planet and figure out how the first colonists will survive on Mars for their first voyage. It's easy to think about what you need to survive on Earth, but on Mars it's a different problem. Mars is very different from Earth, and if we put them on the planet with the wrong kind of supplies and such, it's going to kill them, and there's nothing we can do about it. Thus, while it may not seem it now, these years of preparation are vital to the colonization movement as a whole, because without this preparation, something can and will go wrong, and no one wants that. Number 4. Asteroid Impact. While we're on the topic of space, let's talk about comets, meteors, and asteroids. These are things that we absolutely know are in space, and sometimes we can see them harmlessly rain down from above. Other times they break up in the atmosphere and crash into the Earth in a way that we can collect them and learn more about space as a whole. And sometimes they can come into the Earth's atmosphere, crash into the planet, and create such an explosion of energy that they can wipe out all the dinosaurs. Do I need to explain which one we hope doesn't happen in the year 2020? Yeah, exactly. Not surprisingly, there are a lot of people who fear asteroid strikes, but they're not really sure how likely it honestly is that this will happen. Ironically enough, even NASA has issues trying to figure out the likelihood of such events, so they decided to launch up a satellite that'll help them map out the nearby areas of space and see what was up there. To their shock, they found hundreds of undocumented comets, meteors, and asteroids, many of which were near-Earth objects, meaning that they could potentially hit the Earth. To be clear, not all of them pose a danger to us. Some will very likely dissolve in the atmosphere with no ill effects to us. But there are some that could pose a danger, and NASA admits that while unlikely, 2020 is a year in which an impact of some kind could happen. Depending on the size of the meteor or asteroid that hits, it could cause a lot of damage. Number 3. Magnetic pole shift. There are many things that hold the world together, and oftentimes you live your life without even realizing it. For example, you know that the atmosphere in our world keeps the air in, right? But what you sometimes forget is that it also shields us from all the harmful radiation that the sun emits, thus keeping us safe while still keeping us warm and letting the light in. Another thing that keeps us together is the Earth's magnetic poles, which help keeps things in a certain place, if you will, by emitting strong electromagnetic bonds. However, there are some who believe that 2020 could be a year in which those magnetic poles shift. Why does that matter? Well, think of it like this. The poles as they are placed right now keeps things locked down, in terms of position in many aspects. So what do you think would happen if those very important lockdown positions suddenly shifted? Yeah, exactly. Other things would have to shift with it, to the extent that various areas of the world would become flooded to a terrible degree. Projections estimate that if such a shift happened, that places like North America, Africa, and more would be ripped apart and divided by the rising and shifting waters. But what would cause such a shift? Several things actually, and some people believe that they could happen in 2020 or the near future. This would include things like an asteroid impact, a chain of volcanic eruptions, and more. Granted, that's a lot of random chance, but it could happen. Number 2. The American 2020 election. Politics aren't something that a lot of people want to talk about until it gets to election season. And even then, if we're being honest, and not so ironically, the American elections are the ones that the eyes of the world are super focused on. In 2016, that very world was shocked when Donald Trump won the presidency, when all charts showed that Hillary Clinton was set to win. Just going to prove that you can't always trust predictions and charts. Anyway, what was to follow would be one of the most controversial presidencies in all of history. And America has had some controversial runs in the past. But with Trump, people are so over what he's done and what he's tried to do that they are almost desperate to try and get to the 2020 elections so that someone else can get elected. As for who are the frontrunners, that's a little hard to say, as politics are tricky and one person can be a leader one moment and then be out of the running the next. Which is another reason why Trump's victory was so shocking, because no one expected him to make it that far in the first place. Regardless of who might win, just about everyone who cares about the United States and the world at large hopes that it will be literally anyone but Donald Trump. But he can still run again, and technically speaking, he does have a chance to run again, which for many would be like a literal doomsday scenario, but that's for another list. Either way though, if you have the power to vote and you want to see change in your country, be sure to vote, or else someone you might not like may get elected because not enough people felt like they could change the world. Number 1. Technology grows even more. If we're looking at both the future and the likely future, technology is no doubt on that particular path. So much so that the question isn't whether technology will advance in 2020, but rather how much it'll advance in 2020. You might have noticed, but 2019 had some big strides in regards to technology. Not the least of which was the building of special AIs that many people have in their homes and robots that are beginning to act like human beings. So where will we be in 2020? There are many paths it could go, including the VR landscape, which has been growing in popularity over the last several years. Scientists are trying to use VR technology to grow interactivity in the cyber world, which of course means that we're getting one step closer to the holodecks of Star Trek. AI growth is also very likely, which means Skynet could be coming any year now. There's also new gaming consoles coming out, the latest new powerful computer system, brand new cars like the Tesla that can drive themselves, and more. So the question really is, just how far did technology advance by the time we end 2020? Thanks for watching, everyone. What did you think of these events that may or may not happen in 2020? Which of them do you think will affect the year the most? Do you know something that'll happen in 2020 that we left off the list? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on the channel.